Well, hello, and welcome to Access 2016, part of the Office 2016 suite. In this course, we're going to be discussing Microsoft Access and what it can do for you. We'll be talking about the very basic things of what a database is, so we understand some of the fundamentals of designing databases, because really that's one of the keys to Access success is good planning ahead of time, knowing what you're trying to accomplish. Then we'll go into some things about the wizards that are built in. Don't be afraid of Access because it is a database. It has lots of things built in that can help you go forward and make a good database quickly. Then we'll move into some of the intermediate and advanced features and get into customizing the database, starting things from scratch, how we can use queries and reports to manipulate the data in such a way that we can actually have meaningful information out of it. To get us started though, I really want to take a step back and begin to understand what Access is. Access is what's called a relational database. A relational database is a organization of data into disparate elements that are then connected and allows us to have one element here that relates to lots of elements someplace else. So for example, an example of this, my employee ID number. I can use my ID number and that relates to lots of pieces of information about me, my name, my address, my zip code, my hourly rate, and whatever it may be. So I can relate to collections of information. It all stems from Excel. So when we look over here, I'm going to go back and look at Excel. This is one of the spreadsheets we used in the Excel course. And it actually is what we use for pivot tables. So one of the advanced functions in Excel is what's called a pivot table. And a pivot table is kind of the last step for data analysis prior to going into a database. So when I look at this, I'm looking at a whole lot of information repeated. You can see that all of these rows have the word Brendan at the beginning of it. All of these data points are associated with Brendan. If I take this information, I can turn it into a pivot table, so it allows me to manipulate the data and look at it differently. But the data is still housed on one single spreadsheet. I can't do complicated comparisons of that agent with sales data that's on a completely different spreadsheet because the format of it just doesn't work together. I have all of these transactional records of all the properties they have. I can't compare that to their sales and commission rates somewhere else. What Access allows us to do is to be able to do that relationship, to relate an agent to the property, but also relate an agent to a customer and a related agent potentially to a sale transaction. So when we start talking about Access, a real key is we're going to try and use real world scenarios to help understand how Access is going to help us moving forward. So when we go through it, we're going to be talking about salespeople, we're going to be talking about customers, we're going to be talking about invoices and invoice records and reporting and commissions and profits and all that stuff, but it's all going to be focused around that. Does that mean that it's best suited for only corporate environments like that? No. It just gives us a format that everybody can hang the knowledge around. It's that framework that we can use to understand how Access is allowing us to work. So as we go through that, I'll start giving you some of the options that are available. So we may not get to every individual item as an example, but as we go through the process, you'll see these are the options that are available for me to do that. Okay, so Access is a database. Access is a collection of data and it's relational. We said that it has lots of different things associated with it. I need to cover a concept called normalization. When we talk about normalization, it really means the way the data is organized. And to help us understand that, I've got another spreadsheet here. And what I'm looking at is basically timesheet hours. If I kind of give you the structure here, I've got my salespeople. I have the customer name. I have the contact at that customer. And right here, I have a sales hourly record. So I have sales activity on this date was 2 hours. But I also have sales activity on this date was 5 hours. So if I look at this one individual spreadsheet, I am duplicating information horizontally. I'm saying, okay, here's my person. then here's a single set of information and a single set of information and a single set of information, but they're all on the same row. They're all on the same record in this particular worksheet that we've got here. So that's non-normalized data. There are different ways that I can organize this information. So if I switch over to my second sheet here, what I've done is I've figured out a different way to organize that information. So instead of having one column, and the next to that is a record, and the next to that is a different record, and a different to that is another record, I've created columns and rows that have related data. So you'll see my employee ID is here, and that's all that I see. Over here is my department, my customer ID, my customer name, my contact. Then here are all of the records. These are all the pieces that were here, here, and here. Now what I've done is I've moved them all underneath. So when I look at this, I have the person is duplicated multiple times. I have their ID, their first name, their last name, their department. Completely duplicated. All of those values are duplicated. Then if I look at the customer, I have their customer ID is duplicated. Their name and their contact information is duplicated. The category is, and the date and the hours. Now the date and the hours is not duplicated. That is unique for each and every row. So what we're doing is we're getting closer to a fully normalized data. There's considered 4, 3, 2, and 1 level of normalization. In this case, we're getting down to a third or a second level of normalization in that instead of having the same data this way, column-wise repeated, because remember we had category, date, hours, category, date, hours, category, date, hours. Now we have all of our columns are unique. So, but now we have a row issue that we have data that is repeated over and over and over again. So I can go one step further than this and indicate that I only have one value that is repeated. And that's what the second level, or the getting closer to that fully normalized data, so that all I have is the employee ID is repeated once, the customer ID is repeated once, and the category, date, and hours becomes my variable that I need to have every time. So if I take a look at this, this record becomes a unique collection of values. In other words, it has 1013685 sales 17/2013 2. This one is different than that top one with the minimal amount of data stored in it. I have one employee ID number, one customer ID, one category, one date, and 1 hours. So if I take a look at that, this is all different as a whole from this one. Now, if I go back and take a look at this row is different than this row. The difference is I have a lot of extra data that I can extract because I have a variable or a value that I can use as my reference point. That's the whole idea behind a relational database, is the fact that this one value, I can take all the associated attributes of that value and move them out and store them in another table. And in that table, I only have one entry. So I have 1001 has one line in my salesperson table. Then I can take my customer. My customer ID in my customer table occurs once. It is a unique value. Then I can use them multiple times in this database. So we're gonna get to here. We're gonna get to a situation where I can enter a salesperson's ID and it will automatically populate the salesperson information because that information is stored in a separate table and it just pulls it over. So I can display it from multiple tables because they're linked, because there's a relationship between those two particular values. Then we can take our customer ID, we can link that information as well. This over here is a table in and of itself, which is individual entries because these three values together are unique every time. I need to know the category, the date, and the hours. Is it likely that I'll have exactly the same thing for the same person, for the same customer? No. I'm not going to have 1001-3686 sales January 7th, 2 hours more than once. I'm just not going to do it because there's no reason to. So that's why we say we're at a normalized data structure. we have the minimum amount of data necessary to make that record unique without losing information. That's what normalization is all about. So, okay, hopefully you've gotten an idea of what we're going to do. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Access. I'm going to go ahead and launch Microsoft Access for us. And we're going to do something a little bit different than some of the other Office classes. In the other Office classes, we started by going to a blank document and discussing the interface. In this case, I don't want to do that because we're going to be building a lot of the interface as we go along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use one of the templates that is available. When I open up an Access template, it is a predefined collection of objects. We're going to find out in just a minute that Access itself, an Access file, contains lots and lots and lots of elements that we're going to be creating. And those elements include tables, forms, queries, reports, macros. Those are all considered elements within the particular file that we have. So in our case, I'm going to go ahead and open up this updated asset tracking database. When I click on that, it goes ahead and gives me a preview of what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and create it. And here we have our Access database. It goes ahead and pre-configures everything. The nice thing about templates is that it actually brings up all the stuff you need. It makes it look nice. And then you can go in and you can update or change the information to meet your needs. So let's take a minute, and I'm going to go ahead and enable content from a security perspective here. And the first thing that happens, it says, okay, welcome to the Assets database. Great. Because this is a template from Microsoft, they give us a nice video to walk through and see what it is. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to close this window, and we're going to take a look at what we see. We're going to explore the interface for Access. Because as we continue to build our own Access database, because that's what we're going to do is start from scratch and build some of these elements, you need to know where the things I'm talking about are. Because there are buttons and groups and ribbons and toolbars and windows and layouts and designs that you need to know where they are. So when I look at this, I'm going to work from the top and work my way down. Just like in any other Microsoft Office product, in the upper left-hand corner, I have a quick launch toolbar. This quick launch toolbar is just Microsoft's way of giving us quick access to pieces of information, to data. In this case, I can save it. Now, when I save here, I'm saving the entire database. Now, when I save the entire database, I am saving all of the individual objects that are within that database as well. So I can't close this database until every element has been saved, which means if I'm working on something and I've got an error that doesn't let me save, I can't save the entire file. It'll tell me, do you want to ignore that? And we don't want to do that. So that's where I can save it. Over here, it's giving me information about the file itself. First off, it tells me that I'm Access, which makes sense because I launched it. But it also gives me the name and the location of the actual database file that I'm using. Now in this case, because I opened it up from a template, it's a generic, it gives me the file location of the template, that it's from 2007 to 2016 file format. When I save this file, I would change the name and update that. So it would be my assets or the company assets, whatever you want to say. Over here, we have our sign in to OneDrive. I have got this Office suite signed in for my OneDrive account, which gives me an opportunity to save things to the cloud, pull them up from multiple locations. Doesn't do us a whole lot of good here. This is our help. That's a help menu available within Access, and over here we have my window controls. It's important to understand that this outer shell that you're looking at has controls. There may be situations where I have windows within Access that have their own controls. So the controls that we have available is we have minimize, which takes this window and makes it as small as it can be. We have restore down and maximize. So if I restore down, it just goes back to window size, which then turns into a maximize, so I can make it large. And then this actually closes the window. Now this window is our database. If that's the only Access window that we have open, it will close Access. Just like any of the other Office applications, the window is the application, but if you have multiple iterations or instances of the application because you have multiple files open, the application will stay running until the last window is actually closed. Just some basic information. Okay, as with all the other Office products, we have our tabs, and each of these tabs is going to do something different. The Backstage tab, of course, gives me access to the file-specific functionality that's associated with Access. I can update the information, I can repair my database, I can encrypt my database, I can file it, I can print it, I can save it. All of those standard file functions are available on that Backstage tab. Then we get to the tab we're going to be using the most. Actually, we're going to be using and accessing a lot, which is Home. Now on the Home, there are several things that we want to point out. Obviously, there's grouping. This text formatting here is specifically formatting text within the text box or any of the text labels that we're using. We're going to find out later on that there are a lot of design elements built into Access. So for example, if I want to build a report, I can add a text box on the report, which will be my title. Well, any of those text boxes that I am accessing, all of my controls to update the font and the size and the color and the arrangement and the order and bulleted lists and indents and outdents and all that stuff that I would do from a word processing perspective is all located here on my text formatting group. On the Find, we've got a lot of controls here. We're going to come back and talk a lot about Go To. I can go to record 1, record 0, record end, next record, previous record, new record. Those are all navigation that we have available. The next one, according to that, is dealing with records. The way Access is organized and the way the terminology works, it's important to understand that you have a database. Within that database, from a data perspective, you have a table. That table houses data in what are called rows. And that row that you see is considered a record. Like we saw in that Excel file when we got to the normalization and we said we had one salesperson, one customer, we had a category, a date, and an hours. All of those together is a row. It's also a record. That record is what we're going to refer to moving forward. So if I say go to the third record, it means the third row in our spreadsheet. The reason we use record is because we may not always look at my data as a spreadsheet. We can, and you can see here that I'm looking at sort of a spreadsheet look, but I also have the ability to rearrange and make them into forms. So for example, if I wanted to enter my time, it's going to look completely different. If I want to do a customer information, I can look at just the customer information and then go between each of the records that I have, and it would change what displays in that particular form. So that's, again, we talk about it. I can refresh them, I can summarize, I can check the spelling. All of the record functions that I have are available here. Then we have toggle filter. There's lots of ways that we can filter information. Now, if you've been through the Excel class, filtering is basically saying use this criteria to only show me a subset of the records that are available for this particular table or this collection of tables. As we go through Access, we're going to start to understand it's not just one table anymore. One table in Access technically is an Excel spreadsheet. So I can actually export out of Excel directly into an Access table. What Access does for us allows us to link those particular tables from one to another and begin to get that relationships.